Hi everybody and welcome back to Murder at Bedtime. As you very well know by now, if you are a regular listener, I think you are all absolutely awesome. And if you're a first time listener, you are also awesome. You just don't know it yet. For those who don't know, I am Lyndon, your host, and this is a 10 to 20 minute true crime bedtime story. No frills, waffle free. Any of my ramblings will all be at the end. So with that in mind, because this bit has already gone on too long, plump up your pillows, pull up your duvet, well maybe your sheet, it's blooming hot at the moment, and let's crack on with the story of Kate Dungey. So it is 8 o'clock on the evening of Friday the 8th of December 1893, and at Lambridge House Farm, just outside Henley on Thames, Oxfordshire, two young brothers, 13-year-old James and 11-year-old Henry Froomes, who worked at the farm and sometimes stayed at the farmhouse overnight, returned back to the farmhouse after going back to their own family home for dinner. They knocked but got no reply. This was very strange because the only occupant, the housekeeper, 30-year-old Kate Dungey, would never be out at this time of evening, and also there was a light burning in the kitchen. The house was all locked up, so they waited outside until 9:30 in case Kate had been called away and was returning later. But as she did not appear, they made their way home, arriving there around 10 p.m. They told their father why they were back, and John Froome, immediately suspicious, decided to call upon George Dawson, the farm manager. And the two men and the two boys returned to Lambridge House. It was indeed fully locked from the inside, the keys in the locks. After searching around the outside of the house, George Dawson found a sash window in the sitting room slightly open. Now the two boys swore it wasn't open when they checked around the outside of the house on their original visit. Dawson pushed it up and the two men and the eldest boy entered the house. When they got to the hallway, there was evidence of a terrible struggle. There was blood on the floor and walls and on the doorknob. A brooch and hairpins were scattered around, and a broken part of a cudgel was found covered in blood, but no sign of Kate. The two men questioned the boys again, asking if they remembered any other small detail, and they both agreed that when they approached the house the first time, they heard a sound like when a cat catches a mouse. Now I've got to admit, I wouldn't know what that sounds like, but they took no notice of it at the time. They found some lanterns and the boys led the two men some 60 yards from the house where they had heard the sound. Very near to this, and it was said afterwards that John Froome was quite surprised just how quickly the farm manager Dawson went to the exact spot where they found the terribly bludgeoned and slashed body of Kate. Dawson, without checking for signs of life, immediately made his way by horse and trap to the police station in Henley on Thames, and arrived back some time later with Superintendent Keel and PC Snellgrove. After taking a note of the position and surroundings of the body and noting that another part of the broken cudgel, which was a heavy 4-foot wooden implement for smashing up potatoes for the pig's food, was also covered in blood, and a fireside poker from the kitchen, which it was thought Kate may have picked up to try and defend herself as she ran for her life from the house. These were close to her body. Because it was pouring with rain and to try and preserve as much evidence as possible, they decided to carry Kate's body into the house. It was found she had died in an horrific fashion. The medical examination found that her head had been crushed by several horrific blows by, it seemed, the cudgel before it broke. Now, some reports said that she was then beaten with a hedge stake, but I'm leaning towards it just being the cudgel. And then her throat had been slashed several times by a sharp implement, which was never discovered. One cut being from ear to ear, and so deep it had nearly decapitated her. There were between 14 and 40 separate injuries on her body, depending on differing reports of the killing. But the attack did not seem to be of a sexual nature, as Kate's undergarments were undisturbed and she was found to still be a virgin. The police investigation found that the murder didn't seem to be a robbery either, as 5 sovereigns were found in Kate's handbag and jewellery etc. in the house had not been touched. However, the pockets on her dress were turned inside out, as though her assailant, either he or she, had been looking for something. The farmhouse was found to belong to a wealthy London fruiterer, Henry Joseph Mash, who used it as a holiday home, and he and his family only lived in the farmhouse occasionally. But it was a working farm and quite remote, and Mr. Mash, who had another house in the nearby town of Henley-on-Thames, had asked Kate if she would prefer to live there, as he was worried about her being out at the remote farmhouse on her own. But she said she preferred the quiet of the farm and was not at all worried about living out there on her own. In fact, she felt so safe that she rarely locked the doors. The police surmised that the murderer was probably known to Kate, and she had let him or her in, as the table was set for tea for 2 with the best china. She was attacked, but managed to grab the poker and tried to make her escape outside, but unfortunately, due to the injuries she had already sustained, she was caught, very quickly overpowered, and then brutally killed. Her assailant had then gone back to the farmhouse, locked all the doors from the inside, then climbed out through the window and pulled it almost closed, and then made their escape. Right from the start, the police were struggling for a motive. Kate was a quiet, well-respected young lady, liked, it seemed, by everybody who knew her. There had been no robbery and no sexual attack had taken place. What was even more strange was George Dawson told the police that Kate's dog, which was chained up outside the house and normally jumped up to greet him, just laid on the floor, looking drowsy, as though he had been drugged. The inquest into Kate's death took place in the drawing room at Lambridge House on Monday the 11th December 1893, where Mr. Mash said in evidence that George Dawson had 3 months before the murder wanted to move into Lambridge House and pay rent, but Kate did not want this, and later the pair had fallen out over money. George Dawson told the inquest jury that this had never happened, and they got on famously, and had only once had a minor disagreement over a trivial matter over some laundry. But he did add that the previous summer he had gone to the house one afternoon where he found Kate crying. She told him there had been a rare scene between Mr. and Mrs. Mash, which ended with Mrs. Mash trying to strike Kate with an umbrella, Mr. Mash having to shield Kate from the attempted blows. Also, he stated that although she had always been very happy on her own at the house, in the last fortnight she had become nervous being there on her own. After listening to all the evidence, the verdict was that Kate Dungey had been murdered by some person or persons unknown. The hunt was on. And after Henry Mash put up a reward of £100, a lot of money in those times, within days the police had a suspect, and this turned out to be the brother-in-law of the farm manager, George Dawson, and this was a man called Walter Harathall, who had been a farm labourer at Lambridge Farm, but had been dismissed 2 years previously, and it was said that for this he blamed Kate and threatened to do for her. Now, I couldn't find any reason for this, and in fact I found one story on the murder which said he had in fact inherited some money and left his position of its own accord with no grudge towards Kate at all. Anyway, whatever happened, Harathall was dismissed or left in 1891 and left the area. In October 1893 he returned with his wife and son, finding lodgings at the Red Lion Inn in Henley on Thames. He found work beating on a shooting party and a stone picker on a local farm. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, a beater is a part of a team that drive the game birds through a desired route towards a load of people with guns who then shoot them. I don't think I can say much more on that really. And a stone picker removes stones from farmland soil and ground surface to prevent farm machinery damage and improve soil for crop production. Exciting work if you can get it. I just put this in because of the two, I had only ever heard of the beater. But anyway, I'm waffling, so back to the story. Walter didn't really help himself. When the day after the murder, he suddenly disappeared from the Red Lion and indeed the area with his family, leaving large rent arrears and no forwarding address. A warrant for his arrest was issued and he was soon found hiding out in Daventry. A quick telegram to the Northamptonshire Constabulary asking them to detain the man who was now going under the name of John Browning, and Superintendent Keel travelled there and brought him back to Henley, where a big crowd had gathered to boo and hiss him and shout the very helpful instructions to the police to string him up or lynch him. Walter Harathall insisted to the magistrate it was their job to find him guilty and not his to prove his innocence. He said he had been in his lodgings the day of the murder all day apart from a brief trip into town between 6 and 7:30. At the trial, the magistrate was astounded that the police left the scene of the crime on the night of the murder without a single officer keeping watch on the body and the house, and left George Dawson in complete charge of the place. If indeed he was a suspect, he had total freedom of the crime scene to do as he wished before the police arrived back in the morning. Also, it was only Dawson's word that Kate had become nervous at the house in the last fortnight and about Mrs. Mash's supposed umbrella attack on Kate. Also, was there more to the argument that she and Dawson had had 3 months earlier? And apparently Kate was a very attractive, unattached lady. Had Dawson made advances towards her and been spurned? Plus we have John and James Froome's testimony that Dawson strangely went straight to where Kate's body was laying when they went to where the Froome boys had heard the sound of a cat making what it makes when it catches a mouse. And I still have no idea what that sounds like. Anyway, I don't know why I'm working myself up into such a lather about George Dawson, because he's not the chief suspect or the person on trial. No, that is Walter, who there doesn't seem to be any evidence against apart from he left pretty smartish after the murder. It seems, though, he would get blamed for it. That was until the examining doctor stated that the crime could just as easily have been committed by a woman. Add Mrs. Mash in the kitchen with an umbrella into the mix, and the whole thought process of the jury changed. Never mind how did Mrs. Mash get from London to the farmhouse, murder Kate and get back to London again without being missed or spotted. A seed had been planted in the magistrate's mind. Add this to an incriminating boot print in the flower bed outside the open sash window, not matching Walter's boot sole pattern, and Bob's your uncle. It was found he had no case to answer by lack of evidence, and Walter was a free man. Nobody was ever found for the brutal murder of Kate, which is a shame for her and her family, and for us, because I'm sure most of you are like your murderers, caught, convicted and punished. I don't really like unsolved murders, but I found this one really interesting, so thought I'd share it with you. My money's on George. What do you think? Let me know. You can find me on Instagram, and please just drop me a line or in the comments below. If you did enjoy this and haven't already, if you could like and subscribe to the channel and maybe ding the little bell for further notifications, that would be fantastic. Thank you. It's free and it really helps with getting others to hear about the channel. And with that, here's a warning. It's waffle time. So good night and thank you for listening to all the people who are saying, no, enough. That is it for one evening. And to any murder at bedtime masochists that are still here, what's been happening lately? Well, I am now a part-time room guide for the National Trust at Claydon Manor in Middle Claydon in Buckinghamshire. Something I've always wanted to be, so it's lovely finally being able to do that. I've also just been on my holes to the beautiful little coastal village of Chapel St Leonard's near Skegness in Lincolnshire, which was lovely, very quiet and relaxing. This weekend, the 15th of July, myself, Lynn and my daughter Nikita are off on a ghost hunt from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. at Wisbeach Castle in Cambridgeshire. If you watch my YouTube channel, The Exiled Yellow Belly, you will know I travel around places with ghosts, folklore, legends and grisly murders, telling the stories of the places I'm visiting. Please excuse my shameless plug of my other channel. Well, Lynn is my resident sensitive on these trips, so hopefully she will pick up on something on this hunt. Anyway, it will be up to see in a few weeks' time. I also recently co-hosted an episode of the brilliant true crime B&B with host Beth, as her usual co-host daughter Bailey unfortunately can't continue for the moment due to work commitments. It's a great podcast, one of my personal favourites, and I really do hope Beth keeps going with it. I had a blast and hope we can do it again very soon. Now, anybody who is wondering how Trev, my lovely friend who hates my boring voices, well, he's fine and hasn't verbally abused me lately. So is that good or bad? I don't know. Maybe he started sleeping well and doesn't need me as a sleeping aid anymore. Anyway, I think that's it for now. If you have stayed this far, you really are amazing and awesome. So I'll say good night and I'll see you next time. Night night.